Number 1. The Danishefsky murder. On New Year's Eve, a night reserved for champagne and fresh starts, the pristine tiles of a luxury Upper West Side apartment were smeared with something else entirely. Shele Danishefsky, a brilliant banking executive, was found completely submerged in her own bathtub. The water was dyed a deep, terrifying crimson. First responders walked into a scene designed to look like a tragic accident. A heavy fall. A slipped footing on wet porcelain. But blood behaves differently when a body falls naturally versus when it is violently forced down. The red patterns pooling on the floor told a story of brutal intention, not clumsiness. The air in the apartment was unnervingly still. Wall Street elites build their lives on calculating risk. But whoever stood in that bathroom had made a cold, calculated decision to end a life. Money always leaves a trail, and in Manhattan's upper crust, that trail frequently leads directly to the person sleeping beside you. As investigators photographed the gruesome scene, one detail gnawed at the lead detective. The angle of her neck completely defied the physics of a simple bathroom accident. If you walked in and found a spouse in that exact horrifying scenario, what is the very first thing you would do? Tell me your immediate reaction in the comments. If you are gripped by the dark reality of high finance, make sure to subscribe and drop a like on this video. The true horror was not the bloody water in the tub, it was the dark, hidden secret lying just beneath the surface of her skin. Sheila understood the value of an asset, spending decades climbing New York's financial sector to amass a fortune of over $5 million. Her husband, Rod Kovlin, operated in the exact same world but with drastically different results. Rod was a failed options trader, a man who desperately craved the prestige of a Wall Street power broker but possessed none of the acumen. He bled money on bad trades while his wife funded their extravagant lifestyle. The marriage was crumbling under the weight of his financial incompetence and toxic resentment. By the winter of 2009, Sheila had finally reached her breaking point. She initiated a bitter, highly contentious divorce, determined to protect the wealth she had built with her own two hands. Rod was staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. His access to her accounts was being systematically severed. Sheila even scheduled a meeting with her estate lawyers to completely rewrite her will and cut Rod out entirely. The paperwork was drafted. All it needed was her signature. The clock was ticking for the failed stockbroker, and he knew that once that ink dried, he would be cast out of the elite society he felt entitled to. Have you ever known someone so consumed by the image of wealth that they would destroy their own family to keep it? Share your experiences down below, and please leave a like if the psychology of greed holds your attention. Rod realized he could not win in a divorce court, but he found a much faster way to secure the $5 million. The medical examiner initially ruled the death undetermined. Rod was dangerously close to walking away with the entire estate. But Sheila's family knew the truth in their bones. They knew Rod's desperation and the sheer venom he harbored toward his successful wife. Pushing through immense grief, they demanded answers, leading to a legally complex and emotionally agonizing exhumation of Sheila's body. When forensic pathologists finally performed a thorough, unhindered autopsy, the slip-and-fall theory shattered completely. Deep tissue hemorrhaging in her neck proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Shele Danishefsky had been brutally strangled. The hide bone told the true story of her final, desperate moments. Rod had ambushed her from behind, using a vicious chokehold to crush the life out of her before dragging her limp body into the tub to stage the scene. It was a murder executed with the cold detachment of a man liquidating a failing stock. He viewed his wife not as a partner, but as an expiring financial policy. He needed her dead before that new will was signed. The sheer calculation required to look your spouse in the eye while suffocating them for a payout is hard to comprehend. Do you think killers like this are born devoid of empathy, or does the obsession with money slowly rot their humanity over time? Give me your perspective in the comments, and hit that like button to keep this investigation going. Rod thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime, completely unaware of the massive digital footprint he had just left behind. Rod's own digital arrogance ultimately sealed his fate. Investigators uncovered exhaustive notes, and internet searches detailing his obsession with Sheila's life insurance policies and the exact legal mechanisms of her trust fund. He had even brainstormed ways to pin the murder on his own young daughter, a sickening revelation that stunned hardened detectives. The man was so blinded by his greed that he documented his own malice. The gears of justice turned agonizingly slow, but they did not stop. In 2019, a full decade after he staged that bloody bathtub scene, Rod Kovlin stood in a New York State Supreme Court. The failed traitor who thought he could outsmart the system was convicted of second-degree murder and handed a sentence of 25 years to life in a maximum security prison. He traded a luxury Manhattan apartment for a concrete cell, entirely stripped of the wealth he killed to possess. Sheila's fortune was secured for her children, far away from the hands of the man who stole their mother. The Danishefsky case proves that the most dangerous predators do not always hide in dark alleyways. Sometimes they wear tailored suits and sleep right across the hall. The financial district is a breeding ground for those who value profit over human life, and Rod Kovlin was just one manifestation of that sickness. Next time, we move from the bloody waters of a Manhattan bathroom to a quiet Sutton Place bedroom, where a wealthy hedge fund founder discovered that cutting a weekly allowance can be a fatal mistake. Number 2. The Thomas Gilbert Murder. Inside a quiet Sutton Place bedroom, 70-year-old hedge fund founder Thomas Gilbert Sr. learned the hard way that severing a financial lifeline can trigger a fatal response. Responding officers walked into a sprawling Manhattan apartment that smelled sharply of copper and spent gunpowder. Gilbert lay dead on his bedroom floor, his life ended by a single gunshot wound to the head. Resting awkwardly on his chest, slipped beneath his left hand, was a .40 caliber Glock pistol. The staging was painfully clumsy. Detectives immediately noticed the glaring physical inconsistencies. The angle of the weapon and the positioning of the fingers practically screamed that this was an execution, not a tragedy of despair. The room was undisturbed, meaning the killer was someone Gilbert knew well enough to let inside without a fight. In the ultra-wealthy enclaves of New York, violence is rarely a random break-in. It is usually an inside job driven by close proximity to vast fortunes. Police began pulling apart the layers of his life, looking for anyone who stood to gain from his sudden demise. If you found yourself investigating a clearly staged crime scene, what small physical detail do you think would give the killer away first? Share your investigative theories in the comments below. If this descent into Wall Street's darkest corners is keeping you on edge, please hit the like button right now. The biggest clue was not the gun on his chest, but the bitter financial standoff brewing right outside his front door. Thomas Gilbert Jr. was 30 years old, possessing a prestigious Princeton economics degree and a lifestyle entirely funded by his father's immense hedge fund wealth. While his peers built careers, Jr. drifted through high society clubs, racking up massive debts while relying on a substantial weekly allowance to maintain the illusion of success. The investigation uncovered a toxic, escalating tension between father and son. Gilbert Sr. had grown exhausted from financing a lavish, responsibility-free existence. In the days leading up to the murder, the financial tap was finally cranked shut. Sr. delivered a devastating ultimatum, threatening to completely sever Jr.'s $1,000 weekly stipend and stop paying the rent on his luxury Chelsea apartment. For a man accustomed to limitless resources, this was not just a loss of income, it was a total erasure of his elite identity. Jr. panicked as the reality of impending poverty set in. He traveled to his parents' Sutton Place home, demanding a private meeting with his father. The atmosphere inside the apartment must have been suffocating as the son confronted the man who controlled his universe. Have you ever witnessed someone entirely lose their grip on reality when faced with the sudden loss of their financial security? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Drop a like on the video if the psychology behind these brutal family betrayals fascinates you. Jr. asked his mother to go out and fetch him a sandwich, ensuring he was entirely alone with his father and the loaded weapon hidden in his jacket. The moment his mother left the apartment, the quiet wealth of Sutton Place was shattered by a single gunshot. When she returned minutes later, she found her husband dead on the floor and her son completely vanished. Jr. fled the scene, leaving behind a clumsily staged suicide that unraveled within hours. Detectives rapidly secured search warrants for Junior's Chelsea apartment, expecting to find a panicked man attempting to flee the city. Instead, they uncovered a trove of physical evidence that painted a picture of deep, premeditated malice. Police recovered loose ammunition perfectly matching the shell casing found next to his father's body, alongside a credit card skimming device and blank forged cards. Junior was not just a spoiled heir. He was actively pivoting into fraud to fund his lifestyle before resorting to patricide. Digital forensics proved he had recently driven to Ohio specifically to illegally purchase the .40 caliber Glock, confirming this was not a sudden crime of passion. He spent weeks methodically planning how to eliminate the man standing between him and a massive inheritance. It takes a terrifying level of absolute entitlement to execute your own father rather than simply get a job. Do you believe extreme wealth inherently corrupts a person's moral compass? Or does it just expose the darkness already hiding inside? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Make sure to leave a like if you want to see justice finally served in this case. Junior assumed his elite pedigree would shield him from consequences, but detectives were already moving in with handcuffs. The trial of Thomas Gilbert Jr. stripped away the glamorous veneer of his high society existence, exposing a deeply disturbed and dangerously greedy individual to the public. His defense team attempted to argue severe mental illness, claiming he was utterly incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. But the jury saw right through the expensive legal maneuvers. They focused on the calculated trip to buy the untraceable gun, the deliberate staging of the suicide, and the cold-blooded trick used to get his mother out of the apartment. This was not a break from reality. It was a highly organized execution driven by the fear of losing an allowance. In 2019, Junior was convicted of second-degree murder. The judge handed down a sentence of 30 years to life in a maximum security prison, ensuring the disgraced Princeton graduate would spend the rest of his days far removed from the luxury he murdered to protect. He traded bespoke suits and exclusive Manhattan clubs for a standard-issue uniform and a steel cage. The Wainscott capital fortune remained intact, but the family legacy was permanently drowned in blood. Wall Street wealth frequently breeds monsters, and sometimes those monsters grow up right inside the family home, waiting for the day they can take control. Up next, we leave the cold concrete of New York City and travel to a luxurious expatriate high-rise in Hong Kong, where a simple strawberry milkshake became the primary weapon in a multi-million-dollar slaughter. Number 3. The Milkshake Murder. The sprawling, neon-lit metropolis of Hong Kong offers elite expatriate bankers a playground of unimaginable excess. But deep inside the hyper-exclusive Parkview apartment complex, that glittering dream had warped into a grotesque nightmare. Responding authorities did not find the vice president of Merrill Lynch sitting at his mahogany desk or looking out over Victoria Harbor. They found him rotting inside a cramped, suffocating storeroom. Robert Kissel, a financial titan who managed billions, was violently reduced to a decomposing secret, tightly bound inside a rolled-up living room carpet and suffocated under heavy layers of plastic bags and bloody towels. The stench in the sweltering apartment was overpowering, a vile contrast to the pristine marble floors and imported furnishings of his multi-million-dollar high-rise. Homicide detectives immediately recognized that hiding a body within the confines of a heavily secured luxury complex meant the killer had unfettered access and absolutely nowhere to run. They did not have to look far to find the person who stood to inherit his vast fortune. It is terrifying how quickly an intimate sanctuary can transform into a tomb. If you walked into a high-security home and found a scene this meticulously concealed, who would be your very first suspect? Let me know your immediate instincts down in the comments below. Please make sure to leave a like on this video if the dark underbelly of high finance keeps you captivated. The investigators carefully unwrapped the plastic, revealing a body that had not just been murdered, but chemically subdued long before the fatal blow was struck. Robert Kissel had spent years ascending the brutal corporate ladder of Wall Street, eventually securing an $18 million estate and a life of absolute privilege for his family in Asia. His wife, Nancy Kissel, had grown deeply accustomed to this elevated existence, thriving in the affluent expatriate circles where money dictated your worth. But behind the closed doors of their Parkview apartment, the marriage was entirely bankrupt. A catastrophic divorce was looming on the horizon, and Nancy was terrified. Robert was preparing to leave, positioned to take full custody of their children and the massive fortune. For a woman whose entire identity was anchored to her husband's immense wealth, this impending reality was completely unacceptable. Losing her elite status was a fate she refused to accept, so she decided Robert had to die. She chose an intimately sinister method of execution. Nancy prepared a seemingly innocent strawberry milkshake, a comforting drink usually reserved for a casual afternoon. But into this glass, she methodically crushed and dissolved a heavy cocktail of 6 highly potent, distinct sedatives. She handed the poisoned drink to the Merrill Lynch executive with a smile, watching as he swallowed his own doom. Have you ever considered how easily someone you completely trust could slip something fatal into your daily routine? Tell me how that thought makes you feel in the comments. Drop a like right now to support these deep investigative dives. Robert drank the thick, sweet liquid and collapsed into a deep chemical paralysis, but the heavy sedatives were merely the precursor to an unimaginable act of physical brutality. As the powerful cocktail of sedatives dragged Robert Kissel down into total unconsciousness, he was left completely defenseless on the floor of his own luxury home. Nancy did not just wait for the drugs to stop his heart. Driven by a volatile mix of greed and deep-seated rage, she picked up a heavy metal ornament from their meticulously decorated living room. Standing over her incapacitated husband, the woman who had shared his bed for years brought the heavy metal crashing down onto his skull. She bludgeoned him repeatedly, ensuring there was absolutely no chance of survival, no chance of a divorce, and zero chance of him taking away her $18 million safety net. The sheer physical exertion required to beat a human being to death shatters the illusion of the delicate, refined Wall Street wife. Once the brutal deed was finished, the chilling reality of body disposal set in. Nancy systematically rolled his bloodied, broken remains inside a heavy rug, sealing it tight with layers of plastic and tape, before dragging the heavy package into a storage room. She continued to live in the apartment, breathing the same air as her husband's decomposing corpse, pretending everything was perfectly normal. Could you ever maintain a facade of complete normalcy while harboring such a gruesome, rotting secret just a few feet away? Share your perspective in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if you appreciate uncovering the cold facts of these cases. Her ironclad deception held strong for a few days, until an undeniable, sickening odor began seeping out from beneath the storeroom door. The smell of death cannot be contained by heavy plastic or luxury real estate. Police swiftly descended on the Parkview apartment, uncovering the gruesome package in the storeroom and immediately shattering Nancy's fragile, wealthy facade. The subsequent investigation exposed her ruthless calculation, bringing the high society expatriate community to its knees in absolute shock. During her highly publicized trial in 2005, her defense team attempted to paint her as a battered victim defending herself, but the forensic evidence of the poisoned milkshake and the brutal, one-sided bludgeoning told a story of premeditated financial slaughter. The jury saw a woman who murdered her husband simply to maintain her grip on a massive Wall Street fortune. Nancy Kissel was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, a verdict that was firmly upheld again during a 2011 retrial. The woman who once spent her days navigating exclusive Hong Kong social clubs and spending limitless funds now spends every waking moment locked inside a barren maximum security cell. She violently destroyed her family to keep her wealth, and in the end, she lost absolutely everything. The Kissel case proves that no amount of money can mask the stench of a brutal betrayal. Next time, we leave the dense, neon-lit urban skyline of Asia for a remote, deeply wooded enclave in the American Southwest, where a standard piece of sporting equipment was quietly repurposed into an instrument of absolute financial slaughter. Number 4. The Carol Kennedy Murder. Hidden within a remote, deeply wooded enclave in the American Southwest, a standard piece of sporting equipment was quietly repurposed into an instrument of absolute financial slaughter. Responding officers navigating the isolated trails of Prescott, Arizona, in 2008 expected a quiet suburban welfare check, but instead stepped into a slaughterhouse. 53-year-old Carol Kennedy lay lifeless inside her secluded cabin, the victim of a spectacularly violent bludgeoning. Blood coated the rustic interior in chaotic, high-velocity splatters that told a story of sheer, unbridled rage. Whoever stood over Carol had swung their weapon with the kind of desperate ferocity that shatters bone and absolutely destroys any chance of survival. Initially, the chaotic scene was slightly manipulated, subtly staged to mimic a catastrophic household accident, but the severity of the trauma instantly betrayed the lie. The skull fractures were too numerous, the defensive wounds too pronounced. This was a highly personal annihilation. Detectives stood amidst the gore, realizing that out here in the quiet isolation of the woods, screams vanish into the trees. It takes a unique brand of cowardice to corner a woman in her sanctuary and beat her until she stops breathing. Why do you think killers so often attempt to stage a crime scene, even when the violence is so clearly overkill? Share your theories on criminal psychology down in the comments. Drop a quick like if you appreciate the gritty reality of these forensic investigations. The killer thought they had washed away all the evidence, but they left behind a microscopic, damning imprint on the floorboards. The bloody footprints led investigators straight out of the wilderness and directly into the immaculate, high-pressure world of wealth management. Carol's ex-husband, Stephen DeMacher, was a highly successful financial advisor and stockbroker, commanding a salary upward of $500,000 a year. To his clients and colleagues, Stephen was a master of the market, a man who projected total fiscal control. But behind his tailored suits and confident pitch meetings, Stephen was drowning in a hidden ocean of crippling financial debt. His extravagant lifestyle was a house of cards, and his recent divorce from Carol was the gust of wind threatening to blow it all down. The courts had ordered Stephen to pay Carol a staggering $6,000 every single month in alimony. For a man secretly broke, this monthly financial bleeding was a slow, agonizing death. On top of the suffocating alimony, Stephen knew that a massive $750,000 life insurance policy hovered over his ex-wife's head. The math was sickeningly simple for the desperate broker. He could either face public humiliation and absolute bankruptcy, or he could permanently liquidate the problem. Have you ever noticed how the pressure of maintaining a wealthy facade pushes people to commit acts they would otherwise find utterly abhorrent? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Please hit the like button if you want to keep diving into these twisted financial motives. Stephen traded his ledger for a very specific weapon, selecting a tool designed for leisure to execute his bloody transaction. Detectives eventually zeroed in on the exact instrument of destruction used to shatter Carol's skull, and it perfectly mirrored the affluent lifestyle Stephen was so desperate to protect. It was not a crowbar or a hammer, but a heavy 7-wood golf club. Stephen had stalked his ex-wife at her isolated home, gripped the handle of his golf club, and unleashed years of financial resentment directly onto her head. The brutal, repeated strikes were not just an act of murder. They were a physical manifestation of his absolute refusal to pay that $6,000 monthly bill. He literally beat his financial obligations to death, swinging wildly until the shaft of the club was entirely compromised. In his twisted, debt-ridden mind, the cost of a human life was simply a mathematical equation he desperately needed to balance. He returned to his high-end office, adjusted his tie, and attempted to manage his clients' portfolios while his ex-wife lay motionless on her cabin floor. The cognitive dissonance required to transition from a frenzied bludgeoning back to pitching stock options is truly terrifying. Do you think killers like Stephen are capable of feeling genuine remorse? Or do they only regret getting caught by the authorities? Tell me what you think in the comments. Make sure to drop a like on the video to support the channel's deep dives. He believed his status as a respected financial guru would shield him from suspicion, completely ignoring the sheer volume of forensic and financial evidence rapidly closing tightly around his throat. The illusion of Stephen DeMacher's elite supremacy finally shattered under the relentless scrutiny of a highly motivated homicide squad. The forensic footprint and undeniable financial records exposed his absolute desperation, tying him directly to the horrific, bloody violence at the isolated cabin. In 2013, after a grueling, protracted legal battle filled with expensive defense attorneys attempting to muddy the waters of justice, a jury saw straight through the stockbroker's elaborate lies. Stephen DeMacher was convicted of first-degree murder. The presiding judge handed down a definitive, unyielding sentence of natural life in prison, completely ensuring that the man who killed to avoid writing an alimony check would spend the rest of his miserable days relying on state-funded meals. He was entirely stripped of his high-earning career, his designer suits, and the massive life insurance payout he so violently coveted. He traded his sprawling stock portfolio for a permanent, suffocating concrete cell block. Carol Kennedy lost her life simply because she trusted a man who valued his own credit score over her fundamental right to exist. The pristine, manicured greens of his elite country club were permanently replaced by cold steel bars and razor wire. The financial sector is heavily littered with men who believe their wealth makes them totally invincible, right up until the heavy steel handcuffs click shut. Next time, we travel to a quiet suburban driveway in the humid heat of the American South, where a prominent elite attorney hired a ruthless triggerman to permanently silence his wife inside her own vehicle. Number 5. The Sara Tokars murder. The sweltering heat of an Atlanta suburb in 1992 offered no protection against the cold-blooded execution waiting at the end of a quiet driveway. Sara Tokars, a dedicated mother returning home to a safe neighborhood, pulled her SUV up to her house with her 2 young sons strapped into the back seat. The serenity of the southern evening was violently ruptured by the deafening blast of a shotgun fired at point-blank range. The weapon decimated the driver's side window, instantly taking Sara's life right in front of her terrified children. Blood and shattered glass coated the interior of the vehicle, transforming a routine family errand into a horrific slaughterhouse. Responding officers were confronted with a scene of absolute devastation. A mother dead behind the wheel, her foot still resting near the brake pedal, and 2 little boys screaming in the darkness. The brutality of a close-range shotgun blast is not the hallmark of a random carjacking. It is the signature of a targeted assassination. Detectives immediately recognized the shooter was not there for the vehicle or her purse. They were there specifically to obliterate Sara. The neighborhood was supposedly impenetrable to violent crime, insulated by wealth, but killers often use that insulation as cover. If you heard the roar of a shotgun outside your door, would your instinct be to hide or investigate? Let me know your honest reaction in the comments. Hit the like button if you value forensic truth. The terrifying reality was that the monster who ordered this execution did not follow her home from a dark alley. Fred Tokars was a prominent Atlanta attorney, a certified public accountant, and an elite financial handler who projected an aura of absolute legal invincibility. To the outside world, he was a pillar of the justice system, a man who navigated complex corporate tax laws and rubbed shoulders with judges. However, beneath his polished courtroom demeanor, Fred operated a massive shadow empire. He was secretly acting as the primary money launderer for violent drug syndicates, washing millions of dollars in illicit cash through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies. The financial fixer had built a fortress of dirty money, but the walls were rapidly starting to crack. Sara, a perceptive woman, had begun uncovering the hidden banking ledgers and the sinister origins of her family's immense wealth. When she discovered the staggering extent of his federal crimes, she quietly gathered the evidence, preparing to leave him and take his fortune in a high-stakes divorce. Fred realized his wife held the keys to his total destruction. Exposing his offshore accounts would not only cost him millions but would guarantee a lifelong federal prison sentence. He was trapped between an impending divorce and an unstoppable RICO indictment. Have you ever discovered a dark, unforgivable secret about someone you completely trusted, changing your view of them instantly? Share your experience down below in the comments. Please leave a like if the psychology of white-collar criminals holds your attention. Fred decided that protecting his criminal empire was more important than the mother of his children, so he opened his checkbook to solve the problem. The elite attorney did not pick up the shotgun himself. Men of his financial stature rarely dirty their own hands. Instead, Fred leveraged his deep connections within the criminal underworld he so expertly financed. He withdrew $25,000 of laundered cash and placed a definitive bounty on his own wife's head, hiring a ruthless hitman to ensure she never reached a divorce attorney or a prosecutor. The triggerman stalked Sara through the Atlanta suburbs, waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability in her own driveway. Fred's calculation was sickeningly precise. He orchestrated the slaughter of his wife knowing full well his 2 young boys would be sitting mere inches away from the blast zone. The sheer lack of humanity required to subject your own children to the trauma of witnessing their mother's execution defies comprehension. As the investigation intensified, the sheer arrogance of the high-powered lawyer began to fracture under the weight of the FBI's scrutiny. Federal agents bypassed his expensive legal posturing and followed the blood-stained money trail directly to his offshore bank accounts. The $25,000 withdrawal perfectly aligned with the timeline of the brutal ambush. Do you believe a person who hires a contract killer is ultimately more cowardly than the one who actually pulls the trigger? Give me your perspective in the comments section. Make sure to hit that like button to push this investigation forward. Fred thought his legal expertise and wealth would permanently shield him from a murder charge, but his carefully constructed syndicate was about to turn completely against him. The impenetrable wall of silence surrounding Fred Tokars finally collapsed when the criminals he protected decided to testify against him in exchange for federal immunity. The devastating paper trail, combined with sworn testimonies from the hitman and middlemen, absolutely dismantled his elite facade. The prominent attorney was stripped of his law license and dragged into a heavily fortified courtroom. He was convicted of multiple federal racketeering charges and state murder, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Fred Tokars, the man who laundered millions and orchestrated a horrific driveway execution, died behind bars in 2020, his massive fortune completely seized and his reputation permanently annihilated. He traded the sprawling country clubs of Atlanta for the suffocating isolation of a maximum security federal penitentiary. The boys who survived that terrifying night in the back seat grew up without a mother, purely because their father valued his illicit bank accounts over their family. The Tokars case serves as a brutal demonstration that an expensive law degree and a massive financial portfolio cannot wash away the stain of a hired assassination. Wall Street elites and high-end financiers operate on the ruthless principle of asset protection, viewing human life as a liability that can simply be deleted from the ledger. Next time, we travel far back into the historical heart of Manhattan, where a massive 19th-century fortune, an eccentric millionaire, and a suspiciously timed bottle of chloroform triggered one of the earliest high-finance murders in American history. Number 6. The William Marsh Rice Murder. The historical heart of Manhattan in the year 1900 was a place of ruthless, unregulated wealth, but even the gilded titans of industry were not immune to a suspiciously timed bottle of chloroform. William Marsh Rice, an incredibly eccentric multimillionaire and future university namesake, was discovered lifeless in his spacious, heavily draped apartment bed. To the untrained eye, the scene was entirely peaceful. An 84-year-old man passing away quietly in his sleep was a tragic but unremarkable event in a time before modern forensics. His personal valet quickly informed the authorities and the attending physician that the elderly tycoon had simply succumbed to severe indigestion after eating far too many baked bananas. But beneath the veneer of quiet tragedy, a monumental financial conspiracy was already in motion. An empire worth over $4 million, which is an astronomical fortune at the dawn of the 20th century, hung completely in the balance. Wealth of that magnitude attracts predators who operate in the shadows, waiting patiently for a moment of physical weakness. If you were an investigator in an era entirely before fingerprinting and DNA, how would you begin to prove a seemingly peaceful death was actually a highly calculated assassination? Share your historical investigative strategies in the comments below. Please leave a like if the dark, violent origins of American wealth capture your imagination. The true cause of death was meticulously obscured by the valet, but the mastermind made a catastrophic error by immediately marching down to Wall Street to cash in on the slaughter. Albert T. Patrick was a cunning, highly ambitious Wall Street lawyer who specialized in exploiting the legal vulnerabilities of the ultra-rich. He had quietly embedded himself into the periphery of Rice's massive estate, forging a secret, unholy alliance with the millionaire's deeply trusted personal valet. Patrick recently discovered that Rice was on the absolute verge of finalizing a monumental, ironclad will that would donate the vast majority of his fortune to establish a grand educational institution down in Texas. If that document was officially signed and fully processed, Patrick's obsessive dreams of siphoning the immense wealth would evaporate instantly. The corrupt attorney recognized that his timeline had completely run out. He engineered a highly sophisticated, multi-layered forgery scheme, fabricating an entirely new will that systematically redirected the millions directly into his own personal bank accounts. But a forged legal document is entirely useless if the victim is still actively breathing and fully capable of exposing the massive fraud. Patrick needed Rice silenced immediately, completely bypassing any chance of a prolonged legal challenge or a sudden change of heart from the eccentric tycoon. Does the sheer, unbridled arrogance required to steal millions from a dead man shock you, or is it simply an expected byproduct of intense, unchecked corporate greed? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments section. Drop a quick like to help expose these brutal historical injustices. Patrick handed the valet a highly volatile chemical weapon and issued a terrifying, explicit directive to ensure the old man never saw another sunrise. Under the cover of darkness, the valet soaked a heavy medical sponge in pure, undiluted chloroform. As the 84-year-old millionaire slept peacefully, the trusted servant pressed the toxic sponge firmly over his face, suffocating him in a lethal, agonizing chemical haze. The murder was executed with chilling, ruthless precision, leaving absolutely no visible physical trauma, no defensive bruising, and no immediate reason for the local police to suspect any foul play. The absurd baked banana excuse actually worked perfectly on the attending physician, who confidently signed the official death certificate without a single second thought. Patrick firmly believed he had successfully executed the greatest financial heist in New York legal history. But his absolute, overwhelming greed quickly overpowered his otherwise cautious legal training. Just hours after the brutal murder, Patrick brazenly attempted to cash a massive, highly suspicious check for $250,000, made out entirely to his own name. The sharp-eyed clerks at the prominent Wall Street bank immediately flagged the massive transaction, quickly recognizing the unnatural, suspiciously shaky signature that Patrick had hastily forged on the document. Have you ever noticed how the supposedly smartest white-collar criminals frequently destroy themselves by making one incredibly impatient, desperately greedy mistake at the finish line? Give me your perspective in the comments below. Make sure to hit that like button if you love watching an arrogant killer's master plan completely unravel. The flagged check immediately triggered a relentless, high-stakes investigation that forced the terrified valet into a corner, completely shattering the illusion of a natural, peaceful death. Facing the absolute terror of the gallows, the valet completely broke down and confessed to the entire murderous conspiracy, directly implicating the wealthy Wall Street lawyer as the sole mastermind. Albert T. Patrick was violently dragged from his high-end, comfortable office and thrust into a sensational, highly publicized trial that entirely captivated the nation. The forensic and financial evidence was overwhelming. He was definitively convicted of first-degree murder and subsequently sentenced to die in the electric chair. However, Patrick relentlessly utilized the very legal loopholes he spent his career mastering, funding an endless barrage of appeals to delay his own execution. After over a decade of intense, calculated manipulation and leveraging incredibly deep political connections within the state, the convicted murderer was shockingly pardoned in 1912 by the governor of New York. Though he miraculously escaped the electric chair through sheer corruption, his reputation was permanently, irreversibly destroyed. Furthermore, William Marsh Rice's massive fortune was successfully secured to build Rice University, completely out of the killer's desperate reach. Patrick proved that in the early, unregulated days of high finance, a sharp suit and an expensive law degree could quite literally buy a man's life, even immediately after he violently stole one. The Rice estate survived the lawyer's ruthless assault, leaving a legacy of education rather than a testament to unchecked greed. Next time, we leap forward to the extravagant corporate wealth of 1980s Atlanta, where an early morning delivery of beautiful pink roses completely disguised the ruthless, 9mm assassination right at the front door. Number 7. the Lita Sullivan murder. The extravagant corporate wealth of 1980s Atlanta offered a glittering illusion of total safety, completely masking a ruthless, 9mm assassination disguised as an early morning romantic gesture. In the highly exclusive, manicured neighborhood of Buckhead, the heavy wooden front door of a sprawling mansion swung open to reveal a seemingly innocent delivery. Lita McClinton Sullivan stood in her foyer, greeting a stranger holding a dozen beautiful pink roses. But hidden entirely behind the vibrant floral arrangement was the cold steel barrel of a loaded handgun. Before she could even register the absolute terror of the situation, the delivery man raised the weapon and fired a devastating shot directly into her head. The beautiful blooms were instantly painted with the violent reality of a professional execution. Responding detectives arrived to find a chilling juxtaposition on the pristine marble floor: a wealthy socialite brutally murdered amidst scattered flower petals. A hit executed with this level of theatrical precision is not the frantic work of a common burglar. It is a meticulously funded operation designed specifically to annihilate a high-value target at their most vulnerable moment. If you looked through the peephole of your home and saw a stranger hiding their face behind a large bouquet, would you unlock the deadbolt? Let me know your immediate security instincts in the comments below. Please hit the like button if the terrifying deception of this case grips you. The police quickly realized the lethal delivery was paid for by the man who legally owned the very floor she bled on. James Sullivan was a millionaire corporate financier who operated his vast business empire with a level of cold, uncompromising aggression that made him incredibly wealthy and entirely heartless. To the elite social circles of Atlanta, Jim and Lita projected the absolute pinnacle of high society success, hosting lavish parties and spending thousands on pure luxury. But behind the heavy iron gates of their Buckhead estate, the marriage had deteriorated into a fiercely contentious, high-stakes battlefield. Lita had finally decided to leave, initiating a massive divorce proceeding that completely threatened to dismantle Jim's heavily guarded financial kingdom. The court was preparing to order a totally equitable division of his multi-million-dollar assets, legally stripping him of the absolute control he worshipped above all else. For a corporate raider accustomed to liquidating hostile threats, handing over half of his net worth was simply an unacceptable proposition. Jim viewed his wife entirely as a depreciating asset that needed to be aggressively written off the books before the final gavel dropped. He used the very fortune they built together to quietly fund her brutal destruction, proving that infinite financial resources frequently breed infinite malice. Have you ever witnessed money entirely rot a person's core values until they only view the people around them as financial liabilities? Share your perspective on wealth and morality in the comments section. Drop a quick like to help us continue exposing these elite predators. Jim refused to soil his own expensive suits with gunpowder, opting instead to purchase a specialized, lethal contractor to solve his expensive problem. The wealthy financier treated the execution of his wife precisely like a covert corporate acquisition, quietly withdrawing $25,000 in untraceable cash to secure a professional triggerman. The hitman was handed the bloody contract, utilizing the pink roses as the ultimate psychological Trojan horse to breach the heavy security of the Buckhead mansion. But investigators relentlessly tracked the financial breadcrumbs, refusing to let the prominent millionaire use his high-priced legal team to stonewall the homicide squad. As the heavy pressure of an impending arrest warrant finally began to suffocate him, the arrogant corporate titan made a desperate, cowardly decision. Jim completely abandoned his sprawling business empire, liquidated whatever funds he could hide, and fled the United States entirely, transforming into a high-society international fugitive. He spent years hiding in opulent overseas resorts, using his vast illicit wealth to stay one step ahead of extradition treaties, completely convinced that his money made him entirely immune to the laws of ordinary men. He sipped expensive wine on foreign shores while his wife's family fought tirelessly for any semblance of justice back in Georgia. Do you believe a guilty conscience ever truly haunts a fugitive living in total luxury? Or does the money completely numb the guilt? Tell me your thoughts on criminal evasion in the comments. Make sure to leave a like if you want to see this cowardly millionaire finally dragged back in handcuffs. Jim thought he had successfully purchased permanent freedom, completely underestimating the absolute tenacity of a multi-agency global manhunt. The long arm of international law eventually shattered Jim Sullivan's luxurious, sun-soaked exile, permanently ending his multi-million-dollar vacation from the justice system. The FBI, working alongside relentless international authorities, finally tracked the wealthy fugitive down and forcefully extradited him back to the very city where he orchestrated the bloody assassination. The man who once commanded high-stakes boardrooms and dictated global financial terms was paraded into a heavily guarded Georgia courtroom completely stripped of his elite corporate armor. In 2006, nearly 2 decades after the fatal gunshot violently echoed through his Buckhead foyer, a jury completely dismantled his highly expensive legal defenses. Jim Sullivan was definitively convicted of murder for hire and immediately sentenced to life in a maximum security prison without the absolute possibility of parole. His vast corporate empire was entirely dismantled, his reputation completely ruined, and his sprawling luxury mansion traded for a cold, unforgiving concrete box. He spent $25,000 in dirty cash to protect his immense wealth, and that exact payment ultimately cost him his absolute freedom for the rest of his natural life. The tragic Lita Sullivan case definitively proves that even the most elaborate, heavily funded attempts to silence a spouse cannot permanently bury the bloody forensic truth. Next time, we leave the humid, opulent mansions of the Deep South and travel to a heavily gated, sun-drenched estate in Central California, where a college business student calculated the exact, terrifying cost of violently accelerating a massive, $8 million family inheritance. Number 8. The Ewell family murders. The heavily gated, sun-drenched estates of Central California promise absolute seclusion, but for one multi-million-dollar dynasty, that isolation provided the perfect cover for a calculated, blood-soaked slaughter. In 1992, Dale Ewell, a self-made millionaire businessman, his wife Glee, and their daughter Tiffany returned to their luxurious Fresno home after a long holiday weekend. They were walking unaware into a meticulously planned execution. A killer lay in wait inside the dark house, heavily armed with a silenced assault rifle. As the family members entered the home at different times, they were methodically ambushed and shot to death in a terrifying sequence. Blood soaked deep into the expensive carpets, violently transforming the pristine sanctuary into a horrific combat zone. The scene was gruesome, yet seasoned homicide detectives immediately noticed a terrifying lack of forced entry and realized that massive amounts of valuables were left untouched. This was clearly not a robbery. It was a highly organized eradication of a specific bloodline. The sheer brutality required to wipe out a family points to a level of cold malice usually reserved for bitter enemies, not random intruders. If you walked into your own heavily secured home and immediately noticed things were slightly out of place, would your first instinct be to run or to carefully investigate? Let me know your honest reaction in the comments down below. Please drop a quick like on this video if the cold reality of these forensic investigations keeps you hooked. The most disturbing piece of the puzzle was the single family member who miraculously avoided the massacre, supposedly safe miles away. Dana Ewell was a 21-year-old college business student who projected an image of immense, self-made wealth to his university peers. He walked around campus in tailored business suits, carrying a briefcase and introducing himself as an elite, highly successful investment broker. But the entire persona was a total, pathetic fabrication. His luxurious lifestyle was funded entirely by his father, Dale, who maintained strict, suffocating control over the family finances. Dana was obsessed with wealth and status, but he absolutely despised waiting for it. The sudden, violent deaths of his parents and sister instantly made him the sole heir to a staggering $8 million estate. While the rest of his extended family grieved the horrific loss, Dana immediately began aggressively inquiring about the life insurance payouts and the exact timeline for liquidating his father's vast corporate assets. His demeanor was chillingly detached, entirely focused on the bottom line rather than the tragic slaughter of his own blood. Detectives recognized the glaring red flags of a financial psychopath, but Dana possessed a rock-solid, unbreakable alibi, placing him miles away from the bloody crime scene with his girlfriend's family. He had perfectly insulated himself from the actual trigger pulls. Does overwhelming greed eventually destroy a person's basic capacity for human empathy, Or are people like Dana simply born without it entirely? Share your psychological theories with me in the comments section. Make sure to hit that like button to push this true crime deep dive further. The arrogant heir thought his alibi made him untouchable, utterly unaware of the critical mistake his hired triggerman was making. The flawless execution of the Ewell family was severely compromised by the amateur greed of the triggerman. Dana had recruited his college dorm mate, Joel Radovsic, to carry out the brutal massacre, promising the young man a massive cut of the $8 million inheritance in exchange for his violent services. Joel was the heavily armed shadow lurking in the Sunnyside home, ruthlessly gunning down the family one by one. But the complex legal mechanics of inheritance take time, and Joel grew increasingly impatient waiting for his bloody payout. To keep the hitman quiet, Dana began secretly funneling cash to him, leaving a highly suspicious, documented trail of wire transfers and erratic banking activity. Homicide detectives meticulously followed this illicit money trail directly from the grieving, wealthy heir to the dorm mate. Furthermore, investigators recovered crucial forensic evidence, including extensive pager records and matching ammunition purchases, that inextricably linked Joel to the scene of the execution. The entire operation was built on the arrogant assumption that massive wealth could successfully bury a triple homicide. The business student had calculated the exact cost of violently accelerating his inheritance, treating his parents and sister as final obstacles on a corporate ledger. Would you ever be able to look a surviving family member in the eye if you secretly suspected they orchestrated the murder of their own parents? Tell me how you would handle that tension in the comments. Drop a like right now to support the relentless pursuit of justice. Dana believed he was a criminal mastermind, but the walls of his inherited empire were about to crush him. The sheer arrogance of the faux investment broker shattered entirely when authorities simultaneously arrested Dana and his deadly dorm mate. The sensational trial stripped away Dana's expensive suits and his cultivated facade of elite financial genius, exposing a terrifyingly hollow, bloodthirsty predator. The jury was thoroughly repulsed by the cold, calculated nature of a son who orchestrated the absolute annihilation of his own bloodline strictly to expedite a trust fund. In 1998, Dana Ewell was definitively convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge handed down a crushing, unforgiving sentence of 3 consecutive life terms in a maximum security prison without the absolute possibility of parole. The multi-million-dollar inheritance he violently slaughtered his family to secure was entirely seized and permanently stripped away from him. He traded the sprawling, sun-drenched estates of Fresno and his delusions of Wall Street grandeur for a barren concrete cell and a standard-issue jumpsuit. The Ewell family massacre stands as a deeply horrifying testament to the absolute toxicity of unearned wealth, proving that some heirs will gladly wade through rivers of blood simply to avoid earning their own paycheck. Dana thought he was executing a flawless corporate takeover, completely underestimating the relentless dedication of the homicide detectives tracking his every move. Next time, we leave the heavily guarded, wealthy suburbs of California and travel to a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in Florida, where an enraged millionaire executive utilized a vast chain of dark money to execute a mother of quadruplets while her toddlers wandered nearby. Number 9. The Sheila Bellush murder. The pristine, sun-drenched neighborhoods of Sarasota, Florida, were designed for peaceful family living, making the horrific bloodbath discovered inside one particular suburban home entirely incomprehensible. A 13-year-old girl walked through her front door expecting an ordinary afternoon, but instead stepped into an unimaginable slaughterhouse. Her mother, Sheila Bellush, lay completely lifeless on the kitchen floor. The violence inflicted upon the mother of 6 was spectacular in its savagery. She had been brutally shot in the face at point-blank range, and her throat was violently slashed to ensure absolute destruction. But the most horrifying detail of the crime scene was not the body itself. Sheila's 2-year-old quadruplets were found entirely unharmed, wandering aimlessly through their mother's pooling blood, leaving tiny crimson footprints across the pristine white tiles. Responding detectives were seasoned veterans, but the psychological weight of toddlers playing in a murder scene left them completely stunned. A kill this chaotic yet thorough indicated a deeply personal vendetta, not a random robbery. Someone wanted Sheila Bellush completely eradicated, and they did not care who witnessed the bloody aftermath. If you walked into your family home and found a scene of such utter devastation, how long do you think it would take for the shock to wear off? Share your deepest thoughts on surviving trauma in the comments below. Please hit that like button if the absolute reality of these investigations keeps you watching. The killer thought he vanished like a ghost, but he made one massive, amateur mistake before crossing the county line. Detectives did not have to search the criminal underworld for a motive. They just had to look at the victim's viciously contested divorce papers. Her ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne, was a highly successful millionaire financier and medical equipment executive operating out of Texas. He commanded a vast fortune, but his immense wealth could not buy him the one thing he obsessed over the most: absolute control over his ex-wife. Blackthorne was legally required to pay substantial child support, a financial obligation that infuriated the arrogant corporate titan. To a man accustomed to dominating boardrooms and crushing corporate rivals, losing legal ground to his former spouse was an unbearable humiliation. The investigation revealed a terrifying escalation of harassment and deep-seated paranoia. Blackthorne had actively used his vast financial resources to track Sheila when she fled to Florida to escape his suffocating grip. He realized the court system was no longer bowing to his expensive attorneys. For a millionaire who viewed every problem as a simple transaction, the solution to his alimony and custody issues became sickeningly clear. He needed to permanently terminate the contract. Have you ever known someone so obsessed with winning that they entirely lose their moral compass when they finally face defeat? Let me know your perspective on toxic control down in the comments. Drop a quick like if you want to see this arrogant executive face the absolute truth. Blackthorne refused to get his own expensive hands dirty, opting instead to build a highly complex, deeply insulated financial bridge directly to a triggerman. The wealthy financier treated the assassination exactly like a covert corporate subsidiary, desperate to keep the bloody transaction entirely off his pristine books. Blackthorne utilized a sprawling chain of shady middlemen, slowly funneling dark money down the ladder until it finally reached a desperate, low-level hitman. He believed this complex buffer of intermediaries would permanently shield his elite status from the brutal reality of the Florida slaughter. The triggerman was given the lethal contract and the Florida address, completely indifferent to the fact that he was executing a mother while her toddlers watched. But the elaborate, expensive plan began to violently unravel when police quickly apprehended the hitman through basic, boots-on-the-ground detective work. The trigger puller folded instantly under the intense pressure of a capital murder charge. He aggressively pointed the finger up the chain of command, triggering a massive, multi-agency federal investigation. Agents methodically followed the heavily laundered money trail backward, climbing rung by bloody rung through the criminal hierarchy until they reached the luxurious Texas estate of the medical equipment executive. Do you believe hitmen are inherently more evil than the wealthy masterminds who hire them? Or does the money make the puppet master the true monster? Share your psychological read on this dynamic in the comments section. Make sure to leave a like to support the relentless detectives who follow the money. Blackthorne sat in his sprawling mansion, entirely convinced his millions made him legally untouchable, right up until the federal agents kicked down his custom door. The impenetrable fortress of Alan Blackthorne's vast wealth was utterly decimated by the full, crushing weight of the United States Department of Justice. Because the millionaire had utilized interstate commerce to orchestrate the bloody assassination, the federal government eagerly took control of the prosecution. During the highly publicized trial, his elite team of expensive defense attorneys desperately tried to distance him from the horrific violence in Florida, but the financial paper trail was absolutely undeniable. A jury quickly saw the arrogant executive for what he truly was, a fragile, deeply insecure predator who weaponized his bank account to slaughter the mother of his children. Blackthorne was definitively convicted in federal court of crossing state lines to arrange a murder for hire. The judge showed zero mercy, handing down a devastating sentence of 2 concurrent life terms without the absolute possibility of parole. The man who once commanded a sprawling medical empire and dictated terms to highly paid executives died completely alone in a federal prison in 2014. He traded his sun-drenched Texas mansion for a sterile concrete cage, entirely stripped of the wealth and power he killed to maintain. The Bellush case is a chilling reminder that no amount of corporate insulation can forever hide a bloody transaction. Next time, for our final case, we travel to a sprawling, 19-room Victorian mansion in New Jersey, where a desperate bank vice president systematically lined up his entire family on the ballroom floor as classical music echoed through the cold, empty halls. Number 10. The John List Family Murders. The heavy doors of a sprawling 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, guarded a scene of almost unimaginable, theatrical horror. When police finally breached the quiet halls of Breeze Knoll in 1971, they were met with a blast of freezing air and the haunting loop of classical music echoing through the completely empty corridors. But the true nightmare awaited them on the polished floor of the grand ballroom. The bodies of a mother, a grandmother, and 3 children were found meticulously lined up on sleeping bags. Each victim had been methodically shot, laid to rest with a chilling, ritualistic precision that completely defied the chaotic frenzy usually associated with mass family annihilations. This was not a crime of sudden passion. It was an administrative task carried out by a man accustomed to balancing ledgers. The killer had taken his time, spending an entire day moving from victim to victim, cleaning up the blood, and calmly preparing a meager dinner before disappearing into the cold night. The absolute stillness of the mansion stood in stark, terrifying contrast to the immense violence that had just occurred. If you were the first officer walking into that freezing, music-filled mansion, what would be your absolute first instinct upon seeing that ballroom? Tell me your immediate thoughts down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if you are captivated by these dark forensic dives. The most terrifying aspect of the slaughter was the highly respected, elite financial background of the phantom who pulled the trigger. John List was a prominent bank vice president and senior accountant, a man whose entire identity was rigidly constructed around his elite financial status and his devout religious image. To the wealthy suburban community of Westfield, the List family represented the absolute pinnacle of American success. But behind the expensive facade of their towering Victorian estate, John's lucrative career had completely imploded. He had secretly lost his high-paying executive job and was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of massive wealth while completely drowning in insurmountable debt. Unable to face the sheer, crushing humiliation of telling his family they were broke, John resorted to quietly embezzling massive sums of money directly from his own elderly mother's bank accounts just to avoid an impending foreclosure. As the stolen funds rapidly dwindled, the terrifying reality of relying on state welfare loomed over the disgraced banker. For a man who worshipped his own fiscal superiority, poverty was a fate worse than death. Instead of simply securing a lower-paying job or admitting his catastrophic failures, John formulated a horrifyingly twisted solution. He convinced himself that the looming financial ruin would permanently corrupt his family's morals and cost them their salvation. Have you ever encountered someone whose absolute fear of public failure drove them to completely disconnect from reality? Share your experiences with toxic pride in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button to keep this investigation moving forward. John traded his financial spreadsheets for a pair of loaded handguns, deciding that total annihilation was preferable to a downgraded lifestyle. Under the cover of darkness, the valet soaked a heavy medical sponge in pure, undiluted chloroform. As the 84-year-old millionaire slept peacefully, the trusted servant pressed the toxic sponge firmly over his face, suffocating him in a lethal, agonizing chemical haze. The murder was executed with chilling, ruthless precision, leaving absolutely no visible physical trauma, no defensive bruising, and no immediate reason for the local police to suspect any foul play. The absurd baked banana excuse actually worked perfectly on the attending physician, who confidently signed the official death certificate without a single second thought. Patrick firmly believed he had successfully executed the greatest financial heist in New York legal history. But his absolute, overwhelming greed quickly overpowered his otherwise cautious legal training. Just hours after the brutal murder, Patrick brazenly attempted to cash a massive, highly suspicious check for $250,000, made out entirely to his own name. The sharp-eyed clerks at the prominent Wall Street bank immediately flagged the massive transaction, quickly recognizing the unnatural, suspiciously shaky signature that Patrick had hastily forged on the document. Have you ever noticed how the supposedly smartest white-collar criminals frequently destroy themselves by making one incredibly impatient, desperately greedy mistake at the finish line? Give me your perspective in the comments below. Make sure to hit that like button if you love watching an arrogant killer's master plan completely unravel. The flagged check immediately triggered a relentless, high-stakes investigation that forced the terrified valet into a corner, completely shattering the illusion of a natural, peaceful death. Facing the absolute terror of the gallows, the valet completely broke down and confessed to the entire murderous conspiracy, directly implicating the wealthy Wall Street lawyer as the sole mastermind. Albert T. Patrick was violently dragged from his high-end, comfortable office and thrust into a sensational, highly publicized trial that entirely captivated the nation. The forensic and financial evidence was overwhelming. He was definitively convicted of first-degree murder and subsequently sentenced to die in the electric chair. However, Patrick relentlessly utilized the very legal loopholes he spent his career mastering, funding an endless barrage of appeals to delay his own execution. After over a decade of intense, calculated manipulation and leveraging incredibly deep political connections within the state, the convicted murderer was shockingly pardoned in 1912 by the governor of New York. Though he miraculously escaped the electric chair through sheer corruption, his reputation was permanently, irreversibly destroyed. Furthermore, William Marsh Rice's massive fortune was successfully secured to build Rice University, completely out of the killer's desperate reach. Patrick proved that in the early, unregulated days of high finance, a sharp suit and an expensive law degree could quite literally buy a man's life, even immediately after he violently stole one. The Rice estate survived the lawyer's ruthless assault, leaving a legacy of education rather than a testament to unchecked greed. Next time, we leap forward to the extravagant corporate wealth of 1980s Atlanta, where an early morning delivery of beautiful pink roses completely disguised the ruthless, 9mm assassination right at the front door.